Tonight, the one and the many. Of all the subjects that I explore, always go back to one and many. Therefore, I'd like to bring together a lot of reflections on this most interesting subject. First, theologically, first level. Terminology. God, the one, and the good. Is there some way in which we can say, without some philosophical blasphemy, mixing of terms, to say that the idea of God needs to be understood as the one, or it is diminished in its capacity in some way? Let's try it. If we talk about the one as a primary idea, then it's quite simple to reason and say, well, if one is your primary term, then why did the one become or cause a many? Or they fit together, one and many. So if you start out with the highest term being the one, then you have to account for multiplicity. You have to account for a process. You have to account for some way in which this can do that. You then must search for ideas to try to understand that. But when you have the idea of God, then to talk about a manyness, it doesn't follow that if there is a God, you necessarily have a problem of manyness, as you have with one and many. Indeed, with the problem of God and manyness, you need the idea of creation. When you have the idea of creation, then you have the idea of manyness, because creation is a multiplicity of forms. But there are many views of God that don't entail God being the one. The image of God as being a source of good gives us the problem of good and evil. You don't have the problem of good and evil as a primary set of ideas with the one and the many. You have the problem of good and bad. When you have the idea of good and evil in any religion, then you're posing a counterforce, a demonic force that's opposing the good. And therefore you invariably have and must have a clash, a war, a conflict. But good and bad doesn't entail a clash. Now, nearly all religions say that God is one. But when they say that God is one, that's not the same thing as to say that God is the one. Because God is one doesn't preclude the fact that there can be other ideas of God as one, or other things being ones. But when we say God is the one, then we mean that God is the one, and that precludes any other oneness. The one. Because as you move from A1 and put in the word the, you move from a particular A1 what. You move from an adjective, a one something, to a substantive, the one. That makes it a substantive, and it is the one. only one, the one. Now, in the kinds of reflection that we're going to engage in then, we want to know whether or not we can talk about why it is that the idea of the good is linked with the one. If you have an idea of the one, does it entail the good necessarily? How do we reason about this? Could it be that one of these, either one, is higher than the other? Well, let's assume that's the case and see what would follow. If, therefore, the ultimate term is the one, and the second term derived from it, the good, and then other terms following, as a metaphysical creation, as it were, a process or unfolding, then we need to use just one idea. Whatever we want to be the highest term, we want it to be the most ideal term. That is to say, a term for which no other term can be chosen better than it. Therefore, the ideal term for the final, ultimate term must also not only be better, but the best. So then, if we put the one first and say necessarily it follows from this unfoldment, the good then follows it, so that this is the ultimate and this is derived, then we can say, well, how can the ultimate term, the one, not be good? Not be good if it is the best. Because the best means the highest good. So that won't work. Well, let's turn it around and say, suppose we put the good and the one derived secondary. Well, if the good is the ultimate term and the next term derived from it is the one, then the good would not be one, but would be both. If it's not one, if it is not one, it would both be good and not good. And that's absurd for us because we want the highest term, the most ideal term, to be the best and the highest expression. Therefore, from this consideration, we're going to say that we can express the highest term as a hyphenated combination of these two terms. Now, in order to play with this, I think it's necessary to take a look at this idea of one, the one. First, we're going to take it in terms of anything we look at. When you look at anything, me, here I am, right? Certainly, I am one man.